Joining us now is Andrew Weissmann, former FBI general counsel, senior member of the Mueller investigation. Andrew, he's on the witness list, the defense witness list that they submitted today in court. Is it smart for him to take the stand in this case? It's a jury case, as you know, not just the judge. So, how do you think that plays out with the Manhattan jury?
Judge Kaplan, at the request of E. Jean Carroll, has actually issued an order with respect to what Donald Trump could and could not say if he were to take the stand. As Yasmin said, this is not about liability. This is a damages phase. So he is not allowed to take the stand and say, I didn't do it. I didn't either sexually assault or defame the plaintiff. Why? Because Donald Trump has already lost that. He had an opportunity to litigate that, and a jury found that, in fact, he sexually assaulted E. Jean Carroll and defamed her. So that is decided. So it's unclear if Donald Trump wants to testify what he could say. And for those people thinking that Donald Trump will ignore what Judge Kaplan has ruled, that really comes at his peril. Judge Kaplan is a very different federal judge than any of the judges who Donald Trump has faced so far. He is a no-nonsense judge. And so that will really come at Donald Trump's peril here. And Donald Trump's, even today, has been continuing to issue what I suspect E. Jean Carroll will say are continued defamatory tweets or truth socials. Those will be a part of the case that E. Jean Carroll presents as to why she is entitled to punitive damages, very much like Rudy Giuliani making those out-of-court statements with respect to Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. Those kinds of out-of-court statements and lies don't play well in court. So it remains to be seen, but I think within the week we will have the jury's determination here about the amount of damages.
I was going to ask you that, whether what he said this morning, what he wrote this morning on Truth Social, could become part of this case. And as you pointed out, it certainly can. I'm not going to ask you a political question, but in politics, we've seen just the trajectory of how his popularity just grew, and the widening of the gap. DeSantis went down just last March, coinciding with the start of the Alvin Bragg case, that first indictment. So just asking you about, the sequence of these cases, and was it a mistake for Alvin Bragg to go first? Did that case and his ability to make light of it, compared to the Jack Smith case and other cases that were far more serious, was that a big mistake legally? Certainly was politically.
So, I don't know, Andrew, whether we would be in the same position if it were the Georgia case that went first or the Jack Smith case that went first. I think all of those fed into two things: Donald Trump being very much the center of attention as the first former president to be indicted. That was going to happen no matter which case went first. And regardless of which case went first, Donald Trump gets to play sort of this victimization card. There is an irony that really needs to be pointed out here, which is he is playing the victim card. But in the case that we are watching today, that is starting today, a jury has determined that it's E. Jean Carroll who is the victim here, not just of defamation, but of sexual assault. So there has been a finding of who is the victim here.